So, welcome to our Strategic Communicators Toolkit, peering into it for the very first time. And I'm delighted you could join us this week to look at some truly amazing new media technologies. And even more importantly, be given a great opportunity to use them as we all participate in these activities that we have planned for you. And as I mentioned last week, each week that we're going to be working together, we're going to center our talks around a specific, what I like to call a theme or a specific core principle. And this week, we're actually going to start with a very, very important, our first core principle, the principle of communication. We're going to see how, in fact, working together in any team situation, whatever level, whatever kind of situation we're working at, one of the first things we have to do well is communicate clearly and efficiently. In fact, if you want to know the truth, the minute we begin working together on any kind of project, we could actually say that we are, in fact, in the process of communicating together. All right? If you're ready, I'm ready too. Let's take a look at what we have planned this week. And here we are, looking at communication, week 1. Now, by communication, I don't mean just talking with one another, although, of course, that's a big part of it. I mean, more specifically, having very certain ideas, certain aims, that you need to convey to a wider group of people. And most importantly, by conveying, I want us all to understand that we are in part engaged in a very specific task we're going to call persuasion. That's right. Conveying ideas means persuading people that your ideas constitute not just a route to take to get to very specific goals, but the best route. Now, in communication theory, we actually talk about a particular ratio that's able to quantify how successful these individual communication practices might be. And by successful, I mean how persuasive they are. We call this a signal-noise ratio. And as you can guess, the more signal and the less noise we have, the better and more persuasive our communication attempts are actually functioning. So looking at this ratio allows us to break down all communication every time we try to talk to somebody into these very basic components. And I just want to introduce them here because we can use them in our discussion forums when we talk about these ideas, and also we can even use them in our own projects ourselves. So what are they? What does communication theory teach us about signal and noise? Well, first of all, we have to start with a source. That's usually you, or the project manager, the person who has a message to get across. Now, when we have a message to get across, one of the first things we have to do is actually change it a little bit. Change it according to the situation we're in. Change it according to the people we're talking to. We put on a little bit of rhetorical flourish. We take some things away. We put some things in. Could be even how we decide to dress that day in order to make sure our speech is really getting across. We call this process an encoding process. We actually are, in fact, building a kind of code around the message we want to send out. This is the first step we take into making sure that we preserve the signal and cut down on any challenge we might see with noise. Once we're satisfied, and this happens very quickly, I'm talking slowly, but it happens really quickly. Once we're satisfied that we've got a good code for a good message, we start to transmit. And we call that transmission an actual channel. We're building a channel into the audience around us. The best channel, we think, to get the job done. All right, so what happens then once the audience receives it? Well, they don't quite understand it. There's always going to be a little bit of decoding. I mean, you've done your best to get the message across. You've put your best coding flourish on it. And yet your audience still needs to find some way to make it personal, to make it more understandable. They might hear a word that you give out, and they might change that word. They might hear your tone, they don't like it so much, they actually adjust their own hearing. They say, well, I know he sounds this way, or I know she sounds this particular fashion, but actually she really means this. They tell themselves what they want to accept. And hopefully it's close to 90 to 100% of what you sent out, but quite often it's never perfect. So that decoding process, once that happens, they actually become receivers. They get the message. They've decoded it. They've received it. The first thing we can see that when they've actually received it is that they are able to give you a little bit of dialogue back. Maybe it's in the form of a question. Maybe they see something that they like, but they don't quite get the whole idea. Well, we call this feedback. Once you, the source, start getting the feedback back, you know that no matter what they've been able to take from your signal, they have gotten something right. Feedback's very important, and in fact, we're going to talk about that in more detail in a couple weeks. All right, that's basically it. Everything left over, all the stuff that doesn't get across. I mean, we're never really 100%. Well, we call that noise. That's the stuff that didn't get decoded at all, left off to the side, put on the back burner, not really considered all that important. Now, whether that noise is important is a whole other topic to explore. But we can see right away that as much as you try to encode in order to get the signal across, and as much as your receivers try to decode it to receive that signal back, there's always going to be that little bit of noise that didn't make it. Okay, and that's communication in communication theory. Now, I just want to speak quickly about today's professional spaces, the type of environment we find ourselves in, where we have to communicate well in order to get the job done right. One thing they all have in common in 2015 is that they all tend to be fast-paced, right? I mean, whether it's a workplace or a classroom or some tutoring, instruction area, whatever the environment is, there's going to be some speed to learning what we can from one another. You, the source of communication, are confronted with a very serious problem, maybe even a paradox. You're under pressure to accelerate the development, to get the job done, not just quickly, but ever quickly, meet the project by a deadline, but at the same time, this need for speed is always going to have a detrimental effect on how well you can encode your communication. Encoding does take time. We do it quickly, but the more or the less time we have, the more quickly we have to do it, can often have a detrimental effect on how clear and persuasive our signal is. I mean, let's face it, the drive for results often leads to communication failures. We speak too quickly, we don't encode enough, we don't take into consideration what our audience actually constitutes itself as, and as a result, we have project and quality problems. So, we have a task. Our primary goal this week is to demonstrate actual methods and a few helpful tools that have been designed especially to confront these issues. That's right, we're going to focus on how to keep the pace consistent so deadlines are met, projects are finished, and yet, here's the real bonus, your message is clear, is persuasive, and of high quality. You're not really sacrificing signal, and you can meet your deadlines on time. So that's our learning goals. We're going to look at concept mapping and how this method actually improves group communication, and we'll be working with some very interesting screen-based digital visual media technologies. I'm going to tell you what they are. You're going to be asked to use a really interesting tool that Google's put out called Draw.io. It's on the Google Drive, and it can be used to map out a communication plan and a rationale for just about any project. We're going to learn how to use a tool like that in order to make our communication clear. With the screen capture software Jing from the prior assignment that we'll also be looking at, you will be able to document just how your concept demonstrates general principles of communication theory. All right, I'm excited. Let's see what we can do this week.